There is still plenty of seats available in 2023, and I thought it would be fun to go through each of the teams that do have a free seat for 2023, and also some teams that maybe do have 2 contracted drivers, but that might not be their driver lineup next season, and I'm sure you know which team I'm talking about, and basically just go and give my opinion in terms of who I would put in those seats, and also what I think will actually be the realistic move of what might actually happen, because again, although, you know, it's never as simple as just putting the quickest driver in that seat, because as we know, in real life, in Formula 1, there's commercial reasons, there's contractual reasons, so yeah, the quickest drivers are not always the #1 choice, but nevertheless, I've got a list down here of all of the available seats and the seats that might become available, and also a list of potential drivers as well. Now, of course, don't forget to let me know in the comments who you would put in all of these seats, and maybe some other crazier predictions of maybe even moves that I haven't even thought of. So beginning with the team that I was hinting at, which of course is McLaren. Now, they do have 2 contracted drivers, or at least Daniel Ricciardo thinks that they have 2 contracted drivers for next season, of course, Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, but there's only really 2 drivers that could be in that second seat alongside Norris, and it's obviously either Oscar Piastri, who the team clearly are trying to go for. They're trying still, even as I speak right now. There's, you know, obviously we had that crazy week after the Hungarian Grand Prix, but nothing since has been confirmed, and there's not been too many kind of reports because everyone is on holiday. So yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of finding out what's going to happen when we get to Spa. That is going to be amazing. So yeah, can't wait for that. But yeah, it is between Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri. To be honest, not too much to mention about McLaren, to be honest. I mean, again, I find it quite interesting that there is nothing confirmed, because as far as I know, and from everything that I've read, Ricciardo still isn't backing down in terms of, like, he hasn't just straight away kind of said, yeah, I'll take the $21 million buyout and I'm going to go and you can have Piastri. So I would obviously, if I was McLaren, I probably would go for Piastri in terms of, you know, if it was just between Ricciardo and Piastri, because not only I'm sure Piastri is a little bit cheaper, but he's also got a lot more age on his side as well. And also just pinching him from Alpine. I mean, that was such a good move. Like, again, if Piastri was free, if he doesn't have a contract with Alpine, and if kind of everything is above board in terms of him going to McLaren, that was a great move by Zak Brown to kind of take a young and promising driver from a direct rival, and kind of put it onto, you know, bring him into McLaren in place of a driver in Ricciardo, who obviously has been struggling. So when it comes to McLaren, the only 2 options in my opinion are Piastri and Ricciardo. And yeah, to me, I do think that Piastri is going to be the one. And ultimately, I do think it's going to get done. I think that is going to be the move that McLaren are going to go with in terms of getting Piastri in, because as far as Ricciardo, even if he does want to stay, what a strange environment that would be next season, knowing that the team doesn't actually want you. So yeah, for McLaren, I am going to go with Oscar Piastri. That, of course, leaves Alpine as kind of the next team. I mean, obviously, these 2 teams are kind of intertwined. In terms of the drivers that I have on my list, in terms of the available options, I have got Daniel Ricciardo, I've got Oscar Piastri. Yes, even though he said that he's 100% not driving for them, you never know. Maybe he doesn't end up going to McLaren, and maybe he kind of has to, you know, come back to Alpine and say, I'm sorry about tweeting, can I actually come back and actually race for your team? So yeah, we'll see how that develops. I've also got Théo Pourchaire as an option, who is a young driver in Formula 2, currently 2nd in the standings, and he's actually the Sauber Alfa Romeo driver, but I'll get to him in just a bit. And also I have Mick Schumacher. Now, the Mick Schumacher element, I'll be honest, I am only putting in because of some kind of, like, I'm just kind of getting it kind of out the way, because there was some ridiculous and crazy rumors on Twitter, and people basically screenshotting that Mick Schumacher actually followed, I think it was on Instagram, Laurent Rossi, who of course is the CEO of Alpine. Now, Mick Schumacher's future, and we'll get to Haas at the end of the video, his future is still not certain, you know, at Haas, so he's clearly maybe already looking at other, you know, alternatives on the grid. But in terms of Alpine, first of all, if that's actually true, by the way, in terms of Mick Schumacher going to Alpine, that is such a downgrade. I mean, when you actually think, and I've talked about it in the past, like, few videos in terms of, like, the fumble that Alpine have done by missing out on Alonso, because they only wanted to give him a 1-year deal and Alonso wanted a 2-year deal, and then potentially dropping or accidentally not picking up Oscar Piastri when he signed something, you know, with McLaren. I mean, what a downgrade that would be from Ocon and Piastri, or Ocon and Alonso, to go to Ocon and Mick Schumacher. Now, the strange thing is, of course, I am recording this during the summer break, and there's a lot of caveats that I want to say in this video because, again, drivers, especially like Mick Schumacher and some of the other less experienced drivers who we'll talk about in a bit, they still have the second half of this season to kind of change the narrative of their career. So I totally understand, in terms of Mick Schumacher might have a crazy end to the season and he might look like a completely different driver at the end of 2022, but from where he is now, I mean, he has not been good enough, to be honest. Only scoring points twice. I think it was in Austria and I think also in Silverstone as well, where obviously he scored his first ever points. But it's also kind of the beginning of the season and those early struggles, the amount of damage that he did to Haas in terms of binning 2 different chassis and how much that cost the team, Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that maybe he is going to be out of Haas. Maybe they are kind of thinking that Mick Schumacher, the level of performance he's bringing, and maybe the upside that he potentially might have is just not good enough for them. It's not worth the risk. And also a little bit of the commercial value that he does bring in terms of some of the companies that he's aligned with. I mean, we all know that Gunther photo of him in the boat, and also the Schumacher name as well. So yeah, I mean, it's still going to be, I think, quite interesting to see where Mick Schumacher ends up, but him at Alpine, I am not a fan of that at all. I think it'll be an interesting combination. I think, him getting along with Ocon would be pretty easy. I think those two guys seem super laid back, so that would be quite good, but I think for a team like Alpine, you need a bit of spiciness. You need someone, pushy and jumpy, and I thought someone like Alonso actually fitted them quite well, but yeah, Mick Schumacher and Esteban Ocon, I could see it happening because obviously, Mick Schumacher brings the name and experience and he's an okay driver, but again, we'll see how he develops throughout the year. But yeah, that is such a downgrade from where they are this season. In terms of Daniel Ricciardo, I think to be honest, I think Daniel Ricciardo at Alpine would be kind of the best move, to be honest. I still think that Daniel Ricciardo has something left in the tank. He has something left to prove. And ultimately, although we don't know how good Ricciardo is kind of outside of McLaren because of how bad he's been over the past couple of years, Alpine/Renault, where he was in 2020, was the last place where everything worked for him. Now, again, it's a completely different team now. It's got a different name, but even more tangentially, the management is completely different, kind of from top to bottom in terms of Laura Rossi is there, and obviously Otmar Zafnauer as well. And Esteban Ocon is not the same Esteban Ocon that he was in 2020, so how that is going to work, I'm not sure, but I still think Ricciardo is worth the punt. He's a quality driver. I still, maybe it's just the blind Ricciardo fan in me, but I think he's a good short-term option for Alpine, even if they give him a 1-year deal. And I feel like that was actually quite a good combination, actually. Ricciardo and Ocon. Again, it's not going to be the same as in 2020, or at least they hope it will be. But if it was my choice, I'd still go for Ricciardo if I was Alpine. Now, the Oscar Piastri thing, I'm only going to put in there just purely because, again, if something doesn't work out with McLaren, Oscar Piastri, even though he said that he's not going to be racing for Alpine, there is a scenario where he doesn't have a seat and maybe he kind of is, comes back to Alpine almost like crying, like, actually, guys, I made a mistake. Please let me drive for you because, yeah, unfortunately, I was a little bit wrong with my contractual situations, but boy, would that be an awkward relationship when your young driver that hasn't even made his Formula 1 debut and decided to leave the team before he even went to the team is already coming back to you. So, yeah, interesting situation there. Now, the Théo Pourchaire element, I think, is quite interesting in terms of if Alpine are still looking for another young driver who might be massively exciting in the future. For those that don't know, again, Théo Pourchaire is a Sauber Alfa Romeo young driver, and if Alfa Romeo doesn't choose to kind of pick up Pourchaire, then maybe Alpine could kind of almost convince themselves that, right, we lost this kind of young and really exciting driver in Oscar Piastri, and even though Pourchaire hasn't kind of achieved anywhere near as much, he's still a quality driver, by the way, currently, again, second in the F2, and, still fighting quite close with Felipe Drugovich for the title. Maybe they can convince themselves that, okay, we lost this one young driver, but we could snatch another if Alfa Romeo don't give their young driver the seat. Maybe we could snatch him from Alfa. So, yeah, maybe they can kind of convince themselves, and maybe Théo Pourchaire could become a really, really solid Grand Prix driver. He's only 19 years old, so he's still unbelievably young. And again, I think that just could be quite a fun little option if they want to kind of, Oscar Piastri was pinched by McLaren potentially from Alpine. Maybe Alpine can do the same to Alfa Romeo by taking their young driver. But again, I do like the Pourchaire kind of option, I'm not going to lie. I don't like the Mick Schumacher option, if that's actually a real thing in terms of if it's not just, kind of crazy speculation of, him following Laurent Rossi. So, yeah, if the team are thinking about Schumacher, I am not too sure. I'd rather have someone like Porsche or Ricciardo in my opinion. But again, my choice would be Daniel Ricciardo. And I do think that's going to be who they're also going to get in real life, to be brutally honest. I think once they kind of really think about it, they do need another quality driver to kind of back up Ocon, and potentially Ricciardo might be it. Next up, we have Williams. Now, throughout all of this madness over the summer break, Alex Albon did get confirmed for 2023. I am massively happy. He is thoroughly deserving. He has been just undoubtedly a success on his Formula 1 comeback in 2022, leading that team, thoroughly outperforming Nicholas Latifi, and also just kind of bringing an energy once again to Williams. I mean, I think I talked on the recent episode of the Talking Points podcast, I think I said that when George Russell left Williams for Mercedes, it was kind of a little bit of the energy kind of was sapped out of Williams because their star driver was leaving, of course, leaving for a better team and to maybe fight for podiums and race wins and championships. But Alex Albon this season, he's brought that energy back, which is just amazing to see. And he's also been quality as well. I feel like if he was given a better car, if Williams are able to make that jump into the midfield, I think he could still be one of the best drivers in the midfield, in my opinion. And that's his team now. It's amazing how quickly he's turned Williams into his team. He's come in, he's kind of delivered the results in, let's be honest, the worst car on the grid, scored points a few times, and yeah, that team is undoubtedly his. But of course, that still means that there is a seat next to him for 2023. Now, obviously, in terms of the options, I have got Nicholas Latifi, I have got Zhou Guanyu, and I've also got Logan Sargeant. In terms of Nicholas Latifi, I don't have too much to say. I think he's a super nice guy and he is a good driver on his day, but he's not consistent enough. The gap between him and Albon, at the beginning of the season especially, was very, very worrying, especially since he's been in that team now for a couple of years now. So yeah, that was not great to see. And I just think that, without sounding harsh, I mean, brutally kind of being honest in my opinion, he's the worst driver in Formula 1. Like, if you rank drivers from, 1 to 20, I think he'd undoubtedly be, at the bottom of that list. So the one thing I've always said about Williams is that with Nicholas Latifi at that team, that is a fundamental kind of limitation of that team. I think that limits the amount of points that they could score, even if they had a very good car. And what I mean by that is, if Williams, for example, had an identical car to Alpine, so for example, absolutely the same cars, 2 Alpines or something, and 2 of them were driven by Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso, and the other 2 were Alex Albon and Nicholas Latifi, the driver lineup of Ocon and Alonso would just score more points. And even though I think Albon potentially could score kind of similar points to maybe an Alonso or Ocon, they would have that limitation because Latifi, at a very basic level, regardless of what car you put him in, just won't be able to score consistent points and get the maximum out of it. So that's why I wouldn't go for him, because I don't think that the money he brings into the team, which I'm sure is a lot, with the whole Lavazza and obviously, his dad kind of owning Lavazza, I just don't think that the money he brings in outweighs the negatives of him not being quite good enough, if that makes sense. In terms of the 2 drivers that I'd rather have, either Zhou Guanyu or Logan Sargeant. Now, the Zhou Guanyu element, I'm actually going to come back to in terms of Alfa Romeo, because if Zhou Guanyu is not re-signed by Alfa Romeo, I think that he could be a pretty good replacement. I feel like his rookie season I feel like it's been better than what the points actually say, and I think he's been a real victim of the fact that the Alfa Romeo was so good at the beginning of the season, and the development has kind of tailed off. As the cars got worse, Zhou Guanyu has got better, and unfortunately, he's kind of getting better in his rookie season as the car is getting worse, and I feel like that's not kind of showing him in the best light. I feel like there's been some good performances. He's been really unlucky with some reliability. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, ultimately, I feel like he's done an okay job. Again, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he's going to be able to do, in the second half of the season. But if Alfa Romeo don't re-sign him, I think he could be a solid option for Williams. I feel like, I'd want to see what he can do in his second season. He does come with a bit of money as well, and obviously I talked about the whole, Latifi money, but to be honest, I just think Zhou Guanyu would, if you put like Latifi up against Zhou Guanyu, I'd go with Zhou. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like he's a much better driver. Again, I don't think the beginning of this season kind of really showed the true caliber of driver that he is. But again, in Formula 1, results are everything. So just like with Mick Schumacher, I am expecting better results from Zhou in the second half of the season. But yeah, I think he could be a solid option for Williams. You know, him and Albon, I think that'd be kind of a little good, you know, kind of good combination. Also, again, kind of that China market as well. We're coming back to China with the Shanghai, you know, with the Chinese Grand Prix in Shanghai next season in 2023. So commercially, Formula 1, I think they're going to want Zhou in Formula 1 for next year. And I think Stefano Domenicali is going to make some stuff work in the background to make sure that a Chinese driver is going to be on the grid when we come back for the Chinese Grand Prix. So I think there's a little element of that as well. But again, that would be a bit of a risk maybe for Williams in terms of Zhou wouldn't quite be the proven point scorer that perhaps, you know, Alex Albon is. But yeah, they have someone that they can maybe take a punt, I think, on Zhou. However, that to me would only be a secondary option, because in terms of who I would put in that car, I would put Logan Sargeant. Logan Sargeant is Williams' kind of young driver, again, currently in Formula 2. I believe he's currently third in the championship. This is the guy that ran Oscar Piastri in Formula 3 in 2020, absolutely down to the wire, and was so unlucky in that title decider in Mugello. I think he got crashed out after the very first lap, and that was just massively unfortunate. He could have beaten Oscar Piastri in 2020 to the Formula 3 championship. So this guy, and he's also doing a very good job in my opinion, considering the circumstances in Formula 2 as well. I think he's got a lot of promise. He's also American, which I think is, you can't take the commercial and kind of national values out of it, in my opinion. You've got to put them into the equation. And to have an American driver on the grid, I mean, so much of the narrative around Formula 1 is kind of the growth of the sport in America. And for Williams to have a proper American driver, you know, it's one thing to have an American team in Haas on the grid, but nothing motivates and encapsulates an entire nation that is getting into Formula 1. More and more fans in America, nothing makes them more excited than rooting for an American driver. And so for Williams, I think that could be a really kind of good commercial value as well, you know, potentially working with more American companies, bringing more money into the company and into the team through their American driver, just through having, you know, the only American driver on the grid. So I think from a commercial value, that could be quite exciting, and there's some opportunities there. And even as a driver, he is a good driver. I think he's someone who thoroughly deserves a chance in Formula 1. Now again, the caveat, we are only halfway through the Formula 2 season. If he completely nosedives in terms of results in the second half of the season, then I don't think he is going to be, then I don't think he should be promoted to Formula 1. But if he finishes in the top 3 in the championship, gets some more wins, kind of shows a bit more promise, I really would like to see kind of Williams. I think that it would also be big for Williams in terms of bringing one of their prospects, bringing one of their young drivers that they backed and promote him into Formula 1. I think that could be really kind of motivating to the entire Williams company. So yeah, I think that Logan Sargeant, he's got potential. He's quick, he's young. Again, there's that commercial value of him being American as well. That's quite exciting. And obviously we're going to have, like, I think 3 races next season in America. So just all of these little things I think could be really good for Williams. But again, most importantly, I think Logan Sargeant is a very exciting driver. And even if it's just for one season, I think it's worth giving him a punt and kind of giving him the chance to make his Formula 1 debut in 2023. So yeah, when it comes to Williams, Alex Albon and Logan Sargeant would be my combination. A little bit of risk there, of course. There always is when you bring in a rookie, but I think the positives and the potential kind of in terms of what Logan Sargeant could be, I think it outweighs and kind of, you know, it outweighs the risk in my opinion. Next up, we have Alfa Romeo. Now, the only 2 drivers that I've got down is either re-signing Zhou Guanyu or potentially promoting and signing Théo Pourchaire, who again is their young driver. Now, all of this, Alfa Romeo, I think more than any other team, maybe except for Haas, but again, I'll get to Haas in a little bit, they need to give it to the end of the season. They need to see both how Zhou Guanyu does and what points he scores, you know, in the second half of the season, how he progresses from a mixed but kind of strong start in kind of the first half of the season. There was a big gap between him and Valtteri Bottas in qualifying especially, which was very worrying. Although it must be said that kind of towards the end of the first half of the season, he was kind of, you know, clawing that back and even out qualifying Valtteri in some of the races. But that progress now needs to be that progress now needs to be points. That's the important thing, because ultimately in top line sport, in Formula 1, you're judged by results, you're judged in, by absolutes, and yeah, that progress needs to be points in the second half of the season. And I think, if they don't want to go with Zhou Guanyu, if he kind of, again, tails off in the second half of the season, I think signing Théo Pourchaire, who, again, is just 19 years old, could be massively exciting. Again, just like I said with Williams and Logan Sargent, Théo Pourchaire, he is their young driver, so that's always really good. Obviously, the last Sauber Alfa Romeo young driver, Charles Leclerc, didn't work out too bad for them. But again, I'm not saying Théo Pourchaire is Charles Leclerc, but he's kind of got that excitement. He's massively young. He's massively exciting. He came runner-up in Formula 3, so in Formula 3 in 2020, so he does have something about him, and he has this kind of swag as well, which I love watching Théo Pourchaire. He can be, the only problem with Théo Pourchaire is that I don't know if it is just kind of his driving style or if it is just his age. We have seen a few moments where perhaps he's been a bit over-aggressive, maybe it's a lack of experience, maybe it's just over-exuberance, and that would definitely be a risk to someone like Alfa Romeo. But just like with Logan Sargent, I feel like Théo Pourchaire is exciting. I think he deserves a chance in Formula 1. I'd love to see him in Formula 1 as well, kind of another French driver, which I think is good. I think it would be really exciting to see him, and he is an exciting driver. I think him and Valtteri Bottas could be a really good combination, actually. But again, I also don't kind of feel like Zhou Guanyu deserves to be booted out, so it's an interesting one. I feel like Alfa Romeo, they're in a good position in terms of drivers. I think that they're going to have some good options. They already have Valtteri Bottas, who this season has been one of the standout drivers. Valtteri has come into Alfa Romeo, and he just fits, that environment and that team like a hand in a glove. He's been phenomenal in terms of results. I love his whole vibe. He's so much more relaxed. I mean, the social media stuff as well. So they have a solid driver already. They're not kind of in need of, someone who can score points and get big results. So I think they kind of can take a bit of a risk with that second seat. And ultimately, to be honest, I mean, again, it all depends how Zhou Guanyu performs towards the kind of second half of the season, but I'd probably take Théo Pourchaire, because I feel like Zhou Guanyu might end up at another team, which I'll talk about at the end of the video, but I would give it to Théo Pourchaire. I feel like unless kind of Zhou really steps it up and they feel like this is a great combination, they don't need Théo, Théo doesn't do a good enough job, then I definitely can see them just, re-signing Zhou, and I wouldn't blame them, to be honest, because I do think that Zhou has done a pretty good job, but again, I want to see a bit more in that second half. But yeah, I feel like Alpha have a spoil of riches. They could sign anyone. I am going to go, however, with Théo Pourchaire. I want to see him make his Formula 1 debut. I want to see what he'd be like stepping up to, to the big leagues, to the absolute pinnacle of motorsport. And I think he could do a very good job. So yeah, for Alfa Romeo, I am going to go with Théo Pourchaire. But if they resign Zhou Guanyu, I would also be massively happy because, I quite like Zhou, and I do want him to stay actually in Formula 1. The next team that I'm going to talk about, and just two teams remaining, I have got AlphaTauri, who all of the teams I've talked about, there's almost a bit of they're all interlinked, different drivers have a kind of different effect on different teams, and but AlphaTauri kind of stand out in terms of they just have their own bubble. Now, there's not too much to say. I would re-sign Yuki Tsunoda. That's what I think they're going to do, and the reason for that is because Yuki has definitely improved this season, but not quite enough. Again, he has improved, but the results haven't quite been there. Unfortunately, the car also has kind of let them down a little bit as well. So yeah, it's very difficult to judge, where I think Yuki probably had more points last season, but he was nowhere near as good as Pierre Gasly last season, whilst this year, it's been a lot closer between Gasly and Tsunoda, and that's been good to see. But the problem is, outside of Tsunoda, and even though I do think Tsunoda could still get even better and be more consistent in terms of scoring points, and still get rid of some of those mistakes that still kind of creep in from time to time, there just isn't a driver in Formula 2 that's part of the Red Bull Academy that I think is yeah, this guy could totally challenge Yuki Tsunoda. This guy is next up. He's the next big thing at Red Bull. They have the likes of Liam Lawson, Jehan Deruvala, Yuri Vips, and for loads of different reasons, both on track and off track, I just don't see any of these three as an upgrade on Yuki Tsunoda, to be honest. I mean, maybe you can say that Liam Lawson is perhaps the closest out of all of them to kind of challenging Yuki Tsunoda for that second AlphaTauri seat. But it's weird with Liam Lawson. He is a very, very good driver, but on a basic level, I just don't think he's as good as Yuki Tsunoda. He's kind of been inconsistent. There is actually a bit of a joke in Formula 2 about how unlucky Liam Lawson is, and I will totally admit that. I don't think his points this season in Formula 2 kind of show anywhere near the driver that he's actually been, but again, I know it sounds simple, but I would still rate Tsunoda in the same machinery over someone like a Liam Lawson. And why would you want to kind of stop that progression of a driver when, again, Yuki is already integrated, he's already there? So yeah, for AlphaTauri, I do think that they're going to re-sign Yuki Tsunoda. I expect that perhaps it's going to happen quite soon because they do like to kind of make everything. AlphaTauri are one of those teams where they do like by the end of kind of August and early September to kind of get everything sorted. So I do think that Yuki Tsunoda is going to stay for 2023 and again be alongside Pierre Gasly. But again, let me know in the comments, do you think that perhaps one of the other Red Bull Juniors should, do they have what it takes to kind of be better than Yuki? Let me know what you think. But yeah, in terms of the final team, I have Haas. They already have K-Mag signed onto a multi-year deal, which I was obviously absolutely buzzing about when he came in at the beginning of the year. I was so happy to see him back in Formula 1. I was really happy to see him get that kind of multi-year contract. I thought that was fantastic. He never deserved to be dropped in Formula 1, and he's been proving why. He's a driver who's a bit inconsistent, I must be honest. He's kind of like this... Basically, he can make me a bit mad because he can be either absolutely incredible or he can crash into Lewis Hamilton on lap 1 and completely ruin what potentially could have been a great race after a fantastic qualifying. So he's got this kind of mistake in him, but I think over the course of a season, K-Mag is a great driver and a really solid driver. In terms of Mick Schumacher, his seat is nowhere near safe in my opinion. Again, the caveat is we need to give him the rest of the season. We need to only, and I don't think, for example, Haas, I wouldn't make a move if I was Haas until the very end of the season anyway. However, in terms of drivers that I think potentially could be in that Haas, I have got obviously Mick Schumacher. I have got Felipe Drugovich, who is the current Formula 2 leader in the championship. I have got Zhou Guanyu again. I've got Teo Porcher again. And I also have Daniel Ricciardo. Now, the Ricciardo element, I just want to kind of get it out of the way. That's a bit of a wild card shout at Haas, in my opinion, just because as a driver lineup, K-Mag and Ricciardo, oh my god, box office, potentially if Ricciardo can get back to his best, that's one of the best lineups in the grid, especially in that midfield. So yeah, just imagine those two in the same team and, Ricciardo kind of back to almost his best. I think that could be seriously exciting. And again, Ricciardo, in a weird way, he is kind of a bit of a proven driver, and for Haas, a team which in my opinion has been so up and down, the team has been so inconsistent. They finally have a good car, they're finally back in that midfield, and whether it's the drivers binning it, whether it's the drivers driving, whether it's K-Mag driving into Lewis Hamilton, whether it's a weekend where they score double points and it looks like they're back on top of the world, and then the next weekend they're absolutely terrible again, that team is so up and down, that's kind of frustrating. So to bring in maybe a bit more of a calming force in Daniel Ricciardo, who doesn't, even if Ricciardo is struggling like we've seen him at McLaren, he doesn't tend to crash, so at least he kind of has that over Mick Schumacher, and I think, again, that could be a seriously exciting driver lineup. In terms of the other kind of younger options I have, Felipe Drugovich is an interesting one. He's a Brazilian driver, and he does actually come with a little bit of money, which for Haas, who are, of course, an independent, that always helps. You can't forget that. He's a driver who isn't associated with with no one. He's not part of a young driver academy, so I think it would be quite cheap to sign him. It would be quite easy to sign him as well. And again, he is the guy kind of leading the Formula 2 championship at the moment. The only thing is that it is his third season, so by your third season, you kind of have to be fighting for the championship. So he's not doing anything kind of out of the norm. But yeah, he's kind of, he's had a bit of time in Formula 2 already. So it's whether or not Haas think that he's kind of got the potential in Formula 1 to kind of be a solid point scorer outside of just the driver that he already is. Again, he could be the Formula 2 champion by the end of the season. And again, he brings money. He's a solid driver at the moment. And potentially someone that Haas, might want to take a punt on. The driver, however, who I actually would go for, and maybe this is a bit of a controversial one, if Zhou does get dropped by Alfa Romeo, again, I think there's going to be a lot of outside forces in Formula 1 that are going to want a Chinese driver on the grid for 2023 when we come back to China, because that commercially is just massive. I mean, the most populated country in the world, how many Formula 1 fans are there? So yeah, I think Formula 1 is going to be very active in trying to keep Zhou on the grid. And to be honest, I think at Haas, him and K-Mag, I think that could be a pretty decent driver lineup. So again, he would also bring quite a bit of money, which to an independent team is absolutely, massive. So I think that'd be quite a good driver lineup. In terms of whether Zhou would be a big improvement over Mick Schumacher, that's the only kind of question. And I think, again, that's going to be answered in the second half of the season when it comes to what kind of performances both Mick Schumacher and Zhou can put in. But yeah, I quite like that in terms of Zhou Guanyu, you know, K-Mag, two drivers who I think could do a very solid job, and there's quite a lot of commercial benefits to Zhou being in that team as well. And then also, again, I've just put in Teo Porcher, the Alfa Romeo, you know, the Alfa Romeo young driver. If Alfa don't re-sign him and they do go with Zhou, he's just there, you know, especially if he goes on to win the F2 title. You've got an F2 champion who's 19 years old, and surely someone like an Alpine or a Haas could snatch him if he has a strong end to the year and kind of take him away from an Alfa Romeo. That opportunity is there, and we've seen just this season teams being able to snatch young drivers and young prospects from other teams, and yeah, I feel like that's always an option for someone like a Haas. So I feel like Haas has almost got like the most amount of options. They could literally just get anyone up alongside K-Mag, so I think they're going to take their time with it, and that would definitely be the right thing. Mick Schumacher could still prove that he is the guy to still be at that team for next season. There's loads of young options as well. There's, again, the Ricciardo factor, which I think they could consider if, you know, Ricciardo even wants to go to Haas, but to be honest, in terms of who I would go for, if Mick Schumacher doesn't work out, and if they don't re-sign him, I would go with probably Zhou Guanyu, and then probably Ricciardo second, just because I think that, again, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want Zhou in the sport for next season, and kind of, I think there's going to be quite a few things maybe potentially that Haas could get politically and financially if they get, you know, Zhou in the team, and I do think that he's going to develop into a decent driver. So yeah, maybe a bit of an outside shout there, maybe a bit of a controversial pick, but I am going to go with Zhou Guanyu at Haas alongside K-Mag for 2023. In terms of who I think the team will actually go for, I still think they're going to go with Mick Schumacher. I feel like, you know, I do think that he's going to get his act together a little bit in the second half of the season, and I do want him to, because I'm a big fan of Mick Schumacher, but he needs to kind of get it sorted on the track, in my opinion. And I feel like the team that, you know, he's kind of been there for the past couple of years, having the Schumacher name is still good in Formula 1 for them, and all of the commercial benefits to that as well. Anyway, that is it. That is pretty much my grid for the 2023 season. But let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below about all of the teams I mentioned, and maybe even the teams that, you know, I haven't talked about, or maybe some even crazy outsider shouts that you have for next season. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below, and if you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to drop it a like and also smash that subscribe button. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.